Number 1. The island where the world's money quietly hides in plain sight. Picture a strip of land, smaller than the city of Chicago, sitting in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, surrounded by water so clear you can see your own shadow 40 feet down. No mountains, no rivers, nothing that looks remotely important from a plane window. And yet, this tiny place holds more registered companies than actual human beings living on it. Welcome to the Cayman Islands, a British overseas territory made up of 3 islands: Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, and Little Cayman, home to roughly 71,000 residents, and, according to some estimates, over 100,000 registered companies and funds. That means there are more corporate entities filed here than there are people who actually sleep here at night. This is the place where hedge funds worth trillions of dollars keep their paperwork, where private equity giants, offshore banks, and some of the richest families on Earth quietly park their money behind palm trees and pastel-colored government buildings. No income tax, no corporate tax, no capital gains tax, nothing. And somehow, despite having almost no natural resources, no oil, no manufacturing, nothing to export except sunshine and secrecy, Cayman residents enjoy one of the highest standards of living anywhere on the planet. But here's what will keep you watching until the end. How does an island with no local income tax afford to build some of the best roads, hospitals, and schools in the Caribbean? Why do so many everyday workers, not just billionaires, choose to move here and never leave? And what does it actually cost to live an ordinary life on an island where multinational banks operate out of buildings smaller than a Starbucks? Before we get into it, drop your country and your local time in the comments below. I want to know exactly who's watching this from across the world right now. If this kind of deep dive into low-cost, high-quality living around the world is something you enjoy, hit subscribe now, because we're about to break down exactly how life works on one of the strangest, richest, and most misunderstood islands on the map. Number 2, the tax haven that isn't hiding from anyone. Most people hear tax haven and picture something shady, something hidden behind lawyers and locked doors. But the Cayman Islands doesn't hide anything. It's built its entire economy around being open about it. There is 0 personal income tax here, 0 corporate tax, 0 capital gains tax, 0 inheritance tax. The government doesn't collect a cent from what you earn, what your business makes, or what you leave behind when you die. So how does the government pay for anything? Import duties, work permit fees, tourism revenue, and licensing fees from the thousands of financial institutions registered here. Every container of food, every car, every piece of furniture that arrives on a cargo ship gets taxed on the way in, sometimes at rates of 20 to 22%. That's the trade-off. No income tax, but everyday goods cost more because almost everything is imported. This system has turned Georgetown, the capital, into one of the most concentrated financial districts on Earth. Walk down a single street downtown, and you'll pass the offices of some of the biggest banks and investment firms in the world, tucked into buildings that look more like boutique hotels than global financial headquarters. Ugland House, a modest-looking office building in Georgetown, was once famously said to be the registered address of more than 18,000 companies. One building, 18,000 companies. And yet, walk 2 minutes away from that same building, and you'll find a fisherman selling conch straight off his boat, a group of kids playing on 7 Mile Beach, and a grandmother selling homemade cassava cake from a folding table. The money is real, but so is the ordinary island life, happening right alongside it. This offshore reputation didn't happen by accident. It traces back to 1966, when Cayman passed banking and trust legislation specifically designed to attract foreign capital, offering strict confidentiality laws that made it appealing to international businesses looking for stability and privacy. Over the following decades, as global finance exploded, Cayman positioned itself as neutral ground, a place where a company incorporated in Delaware, a fund managed out of London, and an investor based in Hong Kong could all meet on common legal footing. Today, the island hosts thousands of hedge funds, and roughly half of the world's hedge fund assets, by some estimates, pass through structures registered somewhere on Grand Cayman. It's not an accident of geography. It's the result of 6 decades of deliberate legal engineering, turning a fishing outpost into one of the most important financial addresses on the planet. Number 3. The cost of paradise, broken down honestly. Let's talk numbers, because this is where a lot of people get surprised. Renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Georgetown or near 7 Mile Beach typically runs between $2,000 and $3,200 a month. A family-sized 3-bedroom home further from the coast can still run you $3,500 to $5,000 monthly. This is not a cheap island. It's often ranked as one of the most expensive places to live in the entire Western Hemisphere. Groceries reflect that same story. A gallon of milk can cost close to $7, a dozen eggs around $6. A regular restaurant meal for 2 people easily runs $80 to $100 once you add the automatic service charge and tax. Gas prices sit noticeably higher than in the United States, since fuel, like nearly everything else, arrives by ship. But here's the twist that surprises most newcomers. Despite all of this, thousands of people from Jamaica, the Philippines, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States move here every single year and choose to stay for decades. Why? Because the math works differently when there's no income tax eating into your paycheck. A nurse earning $60,000 a year in Miami might take home around $45,000 after taxes. That same nurse in Cayman keeps the entire $60,000. Suddenly, those $7 milk cartons don't feel quite so painful. Salaries here are also simply higher across the board to offset the cost of living. Entry-level financial services jobs can start at $50,000 annually. Experienced accountants, lawyers, and fund administrators routinely earn well into 6 figures. The economy is built almost entirely around financial services and tourism, and both industries pay well because the companies operating here are, quite literally, some of the wealthiest institutions on the planet. Utilities add another layer. Most newcomers don't budget for, properly, electricity, generated almost entirely from imported diesel until recently, can run a household $250 to $400 monthly, especially with air conditioning running constantly against the tropical heat. Internet and cable, however, are surprisingly reasonable given the island's small size, since providers compete directly for the lucrative financial sector clientele who need reliable connections for international trading and banking. A decent high-speed plan runs around $80 to $120 a month, comparable to what you'd pay in a mid-sized American city. Number 4. The strange rule that determines who gets to live here. Here's something most people don't realize about Cayman until they actually try to move there. You can't just show up and rent an apartment like you would in most countries. Every single person working on the island needs a work permit tied directly to a specific job with a specific employer. Lose that job, and in most cases, you have 30 days to find a new one or leave the island entirely. This creates an unusual kind of workforce, highly motivated, highly skilled, and almost entirely temporary unless they qualify for permanent residency, which typically requires living and working legally on the island for 8 straight years, maintaining a clean record, and proving strong ties to the community. Permanent residency then opens the door to eventually applying for Caymanian status, a coveted designation that grants the right to work without a permit and even vote in local elections. The government caps the number of permanent residency approvals granted each year, which means competition is fierce. Applicants are scored on a point system that considers things like length of residence, investment in local property, community involvement, and even how well they speak the local dialect. Yes, there's an actual points-based test similar to systems used in Canada or Australia, except this one decides whether you get to keep living on a tropical island indefinitely. For business owners and investors, there's another path entirely. The Cayman Islands offers residency by investment, granting the right to live on the island, though not necessarily work locally, in exchange for a real estate investment typically starting around $1,200,000 US. That's how you get so many wealthy retirees and remote entrepreneurs living quietly in gated communities along the coast, running businesses that operate entirely outside the island while enjoying beachfront views every single morning. There's also a specific category worth mentioning: the Global Citizen Certificate, introduced to attract remote workers who wanted to base themselves somewhere beautiful while keeping their jobs back in New York, London, or Toronto. This program allows remote employees earning a minimum income threshold, generally around $100,000 annually for a family, to live in Cayman for up to 2 years without needing a local work permit at all, provided their income comes entirely from outside the island. It's become quietly popular among tech workers and consultants who realized they could keep their existing salary while trading their apartment rent for beachfront living, all without the government touching a single dollar of what they earn. Number 5. The invisible workforce that actually runs the island. Behind every glossy image of 7 Mile Beach and every glass-walled bank office in Georgetown, there's a workforce that rarely gets mentioned in the postcards. Cayman's population is genuinely international, with more than 135 nationalities represented on an island of just 71,000 people. Filipino workers make up a significant portion of the service and hospitality industry. Jamaican workers fill many construction, retail, and domestic roles. British and North American professionals dominate the legal, banking, and insurance sectors. This creates a layered society that's easy to miss if you're just visiting for a week-long vacation. On one level, you have ultra-wealthy fund managers commuting between London, New York, and Georgetown, closing deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars over lunch. On another level, you have construction sites to build a better future. Wages for these roles vary dramatically depending on the sector. A hotel housekeeper might earn around $8 to $10 an hour, which sounds low until you remember there's no income tax taken out. A construction worker might earn $15 to $20 hourly, often with overtime readily available given the constant building boom happening across the island. It's not an equal system by any means, but it is a functioning one, and it's the reason Cayman manages to run smoothly despite its tiny size. Domestic helpers form another significant part of this invisible workforce, often living with the families they work for under specific helper work permits. Many come from the Philippines and send a substantial portion of their earnings home every month through remittance services clustered around Georgetown's commercial district. Walk past certain strip malls on a Sunday afternoon, the one day many domestic workers get off, and you'll find community gatherings, church groups, and informal markets that create a support network largely invisible to the tourists sunbathing a few miles away on 7 Mile Beach. Number 6. The healthcare system nobody expects on a tiny island. You'd think an island this small would struggle with healthcare, but Cayman actually punches well above its weight here. The Cayman Islands Hospital in Georgetown, along with the private health city Cayman Islands facility, offers surgical and specialist care that rivals hospitals in much larger countries. Health City in particular was built specifically to attract medical tourism, offering procedures like heart surgery and joint replacements at a fraction of the cost charged in the United States, while still using surgeons trained at some of the world's top institutions. For residents, health insurance is mandatory, and most employers are legally required to provide it as part of employment. Basic coverage typically costs employees between $100 and $300 monthly, depending on age and coverage level, though employers often cover a significant portion. For more complex or specialized procedures, some residents still choose to fly to Miami or Toronto, since Cayman's small population means certain rare specialties simply aren't available locally. What's interesting is how this healthcare access factors into the immigration calculation for many families. Retirees moving here for the tax benefits often specifically choose Cayman over other Caribbean nations, precisely because the medical infrastructure feels closer to what they're used to back home, rather than requiring an emergency flight every time something serious comes up. Number 7. The education system built for a workforce, not a nation. Education in Cayman tells its own quiet story about the island's priorities. Public schools are free for Caymanian children and the children of permanent residents, but many expatriate families, especially those on temporary work permits, end up sending their children to private schools instead, since public school access for non-status children can be limited or restricted entirely depending on their parents' residency category. Private school tuition here isn't cheap. Annual fees at top international schools can run anywhere from $8,000 to $18,000 per child per year. For families with 2 or 3 kids, that's a housing payment's worth of money spent purely on education. This is one of the hidden costs that catches a lot of newcomers off guard. They budget for rent, groceries, and the higher cost of imported goods, but forget that schooling for their children might become one of their single largest annual expenses. Higher education is where things shift again. There's no full-scale public university system on the island, so most young Caymanians who want a bachelor's degree end up studying abroad, often in the United Kingdom, Canada, or the United States, sometimes with government scholarships specifically designed to bring skilled graduates back home afterward to fill roles in law, finance, medicine, and public administration. Number 8. The crime rate that surprises every first-time visitor. Ask anyone who's actually lived in Cayman what surprised them most, and a huge number will mention how safe it feels. This is an island where, statistically, violent crime against tourists is exceptionally rare, and where many neighborhoods feel comfortable enough that kids still ride bikes to friends' houses after dark. Compared to many other Caribbean nations that struggle with gang violence or high homicide rates, Cayman consistently ranks among the safest territories in the region. That said, it's not some perfect crime-free bubble. Property crime, occasional burglaries, and petty theft do happen, particularly in areas with dense tourist activity. There have also been isolated but serious incidents over the years that shocked the local community, precisely because they're so rare here. But relative to its Caribbean neighbors, and honestly relative to many major cities in North America and Europe, Cayman's crime statistics remain remarkably low. Part of this comes down to the sheer wealth circulating through the local economy. When most residents, across income levels, are earning wages boosted by tax-free take-home pay, the economic desperation that often drives crime elsewhere simply isn't as present. It also helps that the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service maintains a highly visible presence, especially around the financial district and major tourist zones, backed by resources that a territory this wealthy can easily afford. Number 9. The housing market that behaves nothing like anywhere else. If you're picturing quaint island cottages, think again, at least for the properties foreigners typically buy. Cayman's real estate market has increasingly shifted toward luxury condominium developments along 7 Mile Beach, many marketed directly to wealthy North Americans looking for a second home with zero property tax, zero capital gains tax when they eventually sell, and rental income that isn't taxed either. A beachfront condo here can easily list for $1,500,000 to $4 million, depending on size and location. Even properties set back from the coast, in neighborhoods like Savannah or Bodden Town, routinely sell in the $400,000 to $700,000 range for a modest 3-bedroom home. This isn't a market where you stumble onto a bargain fixer-upper. Land is limited, demand is constant, and much of the buying pressure comes from wealthy foreign investors rather than local first-time buyers. This has created real tension within the local Caymanian population. Many families who have lived here for generations find themselves increasingly priced out of the very neighborhoods their grandparents built. There's been growing conversation on the island about whether enough is being done to protect housing access for actual Caymanians versus continuing to court foreign investment that drives prices higher every single year. It's the same story playing out in coastal cities worldwide, just condensed onto an island you can drive across in under an hour. Interestingly, some of the older Caymanian families sitting on land passed down for generations have become quietly wealthy themselves, not through finance jobs, but simply by holding onto property that foreign buyers now desperately want. A plot of land that a grandfather bought for a few $1,000s in the 1970s might now be worth several million, creating a strange kind of generational wealth built entirely on patience and geography rather than any career choice at all. Number 10. The food scene shaped entirely by what arrives on a boat. Since almost nothing edible is actually grown on the island in large quantities, Cayman's food culture is a fascinating blend of imported convenience and deeply rooted local tradition. Traditional Caymanian cooking centers around the sea, since that's genuinely local. Fresh conch, pulled straight from the surrounding waters, gets turned into conch fritters, conch stew, and cracked conch, breaded and fried until golden. Turtle stew, once a dietary staple tied to the island's historical turtle fishing industry, is still served today, though it now comes exclusively from regulated, farm-raised sources, given conservation restrictions on wild turtles. Cayman-style beef, slow-cooked with local spices and pepper, along with heavy cake, a dense, spiced dessert made from cassava and coconut, round out the traditional dishes you'll find at family gatherings far more often than in restaurants marketed to tourists. Fish tea, a light, peppery fish soup, is considered by many locals to be the ultimate comfort food, especially after a long day of manual labor in the tropical heat. But step into any grocery store and you'll see the other side of Cayman's food reality. Shelves stocked with American brands, shipped weekly from Florida, sitting next to British imports for the sizable expat community, and Jamaican products serving the large Jamaican population working here. A jar of peanut butter might cost twice what you'd pay back home, but you'll find nearly every brand you recognize because Cayman's wealth means suppliers happily absorb the shipping costs to keep residents satisfied. The restaurant scene mirrors this same duality. On one end, beachfront establishments serving $40 plates of fresh-caught mahi-mahi to tourists fresh off a cruise ship. On the other, small local kitchens tucked into residential neighborhoods, serving jerk chicken and rice and beans for under $10 to construction workers on their lunch break. Both exist within a 5-minute drive of each other, and both are considered completely normal parts of everyday Cayman life. Number 11. The environmental balancing act nobody talks about. Here's something that doesn't make it into most travel brochures. Cayman's entire economy depends on two things: staying pristine, its financial reputation, and its natural environment. 7 Mile Beach, the crown jewel of the tourism industry, along with the world-famous Stingray City sandbar, where tourists wade in chest-deep water, surrounded by wild southern stingrays, generate enormous revenue every single year. Lose the natural beauty, and you lose the tourism dollars that fund half the government's budget outside of financial services fees. This has pushed Cayman into some genuinely progressive environmental policies for a place its size. Strict building codes limit how close new developments can rise near the shoreline. There are ongoing coral restoration projects in partnership with international marine biology organizations, actively regrowing reef systems damaged by decades of boat traffic and warming waters. Plastic bag bans have been implemented island-wide, and there's serious, sustained investment in renewable energy, with solar farms increasingly supplying power to the grid. But climate change poses an existential question that Cayman can't fully escape. As a low-lying island territory, rising sea levels and increasingly powerful hurricane seasons represent a genuine, long-term threat, not a distant, hypothetical one. Hurricane Ivan in 2004 caused catastrophic damage across Grand Cayman, and the memory of that storm still shapes building codes and insurance requirements today. Every resident here understands, in the back of their mind, that the paradise they've built their life around sits just a few feet above sea level, surrounded by open ocean on every side. Hurricane season, running from June through November, shapes daily life in ways visitors rarely notice. Homes are built with reinforced concrete rather than wood frames. Storm shutters are standard rather than optional, and every resident keeps a hurricane kit stocked year-round. Generators, bottled water, canned food, and enough cash on hand, since ATMs and card systems can go down for days during a serious storm. Insurance premiums on the island reflect this reality too, often running significantly higher than comparable coverage in non-hurricane zones, another hidden cost that factors into that already steep cost of living. Number 12. The everyday reality of actually living there. So what does a normal Tuesday look like for someone who actually lives in Cayman, rather than just visits for a week? For many residents, the day starts early, before the tropical heat becomes overwhelming. Commutes are short, since the island itself is only about 76 square miles total, meaning almost nowhere is more than a 30-minute drive from anywhere else. Traffic does get surprisingly heavy along the main roads during rush hour, something that catches newcomers off guard on an island this small. Work culture in the financial sector tends to mirror what you'd find in London or New York. Long hours, high-stakes deals, constant communication with international clients across different time zones. Meanwhile, someone working in hospitality or retail might be dealing with the constant churn of cruise ship tourists arriving several times a week, each ship dumping thousands of visitors into Georgetown for a few hours before sailing off again. Weekends look different, depending on who you ask. Wealthier residents might spend Saturday on a private boat, snorkeling near the reef, or hosting friends at a beachfront home. Local Caymanian families often gather for church on Sunday, followed by a big family meal, since the island remains deeply religious and community-oriented despite all the international money flowing through it. And for the massive expat population, weekends often mean video calls with family back home, since most people living here came from somewhere else entirely, drawn by the tax benefits, the job opportunities, or simply the promise of a slower, warmer life. Social life on the island runs on a small-town rhythm that surprises people coming from big cities. Everyone genuinely does seem to know everyone, or at least know someone who knows them. Run into your boss at the grocery store on a Saturday, bump into your child's teacher at the beach, wave at the same 3 neighbors every single morning walk. This is simply how life works. When 71,000 people share 76 square miles, for some newcomers, this takes real adjustment. For others, especially those escaping the anonymity of a massive city, it becomes one of the most treasured parts of moving here. That contrast, ultra-modern financial capital colliding daily with deeply traditional island culture, is really the heart of what makes Cayman so strange and so fascinating. It's a place where a fund manager closing a $200 million deal can walk 2 blocks and buy fresh conch fritters from a woman who's been selling them from the same spot for 30 years. Where a work permit determines your entire future on the island, yet somehow over 135 nationalities have found a way to build a life here together. Where there's no income tax, but a carton of eggs costs more than dinner used to back home. The Cayman Islands isn't cheap. It was never trying to be. But for the people who've figured out how the system actually works, tax-free income, higher wages to match the cost of living, safety, healthcare, and genuine natural beauty, it's become one of the most quietly desirable places on Earth to actually build a life, not just visit for a week and leave. So here's the real question. Would you trade the higher grocery bills and higher rent for a life with zero income tax, genuine safety, and some of the clearest water on the planet outside your front door? Or does the actual cost of paradise outweigh what you'd save? Let me know in the comments below. And if this kind of honest, numbers-first breakdown of life around the world is something you want more of, subscribe now, because we're just getting started.